Hello and welcome back to the From My Perspective podcast, where I, Jackson McCarty, tell you all the names you need to know in the college football and NFL landscapes that could be changing the football landscape in the very near future. Now, before we get into what we're going to talk about today, go ahead and hit that subscribe and like button. Helps me out a ton, doesn't cost you anything. You know the whole spiel. But today we are going to be talking about college football coaches. Now, if you've been watching the channel or maybe you decide you want to circle back after this, I'll link it down below. I ranked both the Group of Five and Power Five by the quality of coaching in their specific conference. So, for example, the SEC counts as one, Pac-12 to, that type of thing. But today, we're going more individualized. I'm going to bring out my top 10 head coaches in college football, kind of predictive, kind of not. You don't want to be too predictive to where like you're just saying that such and such is going to become a top 10 head coach, because there is still a basis that you need for like consistency and things of that nature. So there are a little bit of predictive measures kind of brought into this, but not entirely. So with number 10, we go with Jim Harbaugh from Michigan. And I know that that's probably going to seem low because I too think that he has a very high ceiling as a coach. But the problem is that at Michigan, it hasn't felt like he's hit that ceiling really at any point outside of maybe last year. And even last year, some of those cracks started showing through, and things didn't end how they wanted them to. So when you look at it as an entity, I do kind of believe his tenure at Michigan so far has been a bit of a letdown. I'm not going to lie about that. And he got a team to the playoffs finally, but when you look at his bowl games in totality at Michigan, he is currently 1-5 in bowl games. Now, granted, some of those are against harder opponents, but I still 1-5 whenever you're supposed to be this elite, legendary, all-time coach isn't cutting it. So, his stuff at Michigan right now, I'm a little worried about his ability to create offensive players. I trust that he can put out defensive players, but the offense has me a little bit questionable right now, maybe outside of their like offensive line. I think they've done pretty well with their offensive line under Harbaugh, but when you really boil it down, it's not even just a talent thing. I think the biggest issue right now being posed to Jim Harbaugh is that his players don't play as a team. They play as players. They play as individuals. And I think that that's been a lot of the reason behind a lot of Michigan's issues, is that there seems to be something missing with that cohesion, that formula, so to speak, that creates great teams that Michigan just hasn't cracked yet and hasn't been able to really figure out. And maybe now that they've tasted success and they've been in the college football playoffs, maybe that changes. Maybe he does start to figure out this missing pieces and starts moving up these ranks. But for now, I think 10 is about the highest spot I can give him. And even then, I have other names that I absolutely considered, like Dave Aranda and guys like that. So right now, he is number 10, and there's plenty of guys right on his heels. But number 9, I do believe some people are going to be shocked by this, because overall, his tenure with his school has not just been, the most incredible thing, but this is kind of where that predictive stuff comes in, and because I'm putting Lane Kiffin at number 9 in the country. And obviously this is going to be a very love it or hate it type of thing, because Lane Kiffin is the most divisive coach in college football. I don't even think it's particularly close, because half of the country thinks that he could very well be or is already a top 10 coach in college football. The other half of the country thinks that he's an absolute joke and a clown and can't handle it on the big stages. Some of that has some credence. I think the USC job did not do him any favors, but whenever you look at how he's handled himself, really since he was at Alabama with Coach Saban, ever since then, it does feel like we've got a new Lane, and it's really interesting, at least for me to see, because as he went to FAU and as he learned from Coach Saban and now at Ole Miss, it's very clear that he understands what it takes to be a good coach now. And he's proven to me, at least, that he is ready to move on from some of those issues that he had in the past. Now, my main thing for him is that it's a new, the transfer portal stuff. It's brand new. College football was not really ready for it whenever all the new changes happened. But the guys who got in on the bottom floor and really started to understand it and work it to their advantage and figure out what appeals to these players, what doesn't. Lane Kiffin is among those guys, And I believe that that will continue to propel him higher and higher and higher, whether that be at Ole Miss or whether that be at a different program. So as a whole, I think Lane Kiffin already has a very solid basis of being able to turn a team very cohesive, which I don't think I would have even been predicting whenever he went to Ole Miss because he was so divisive, and I would have assumed that that transferred into the locker room. But now that we've seen it at Ole Miss and we saw how good they were last year, and then we saw them reload in the transfer portal this year, I'm putting my chips on Lane Kiffin. I mean, no other way to say it. So where we have a guy who is absolutely fighting for his spot in these top 10 ranks, and I would imagine most people would not have him in there, and that's fine because you know what this is? This is an opinion. If you don't like it, you can talk to me about it. Don't yell at me. Don't be weird. But get in there, have a conversation with me, which you can go down in the comment section below. But Lane Kiffin is very much trying to prove himself as a top 10 coach, and while he thought he might have had it at some point, he kind of had to reset. The next guy that we're talking about has held on to that same team and really done some incredible things for his program. We're talking about Mike Gundy with Oklahoma State. On the off chance that you watched my top 25 three-part series on where I would rank college football teams at the end of the season, or kind of predicting that, you would have noticed that I was extremely high on Oklahoma State, and that's because I am tired of Mike Gundy not getting the love and respect that he deserves. He has been a phenomenal coach for the Cowboys for a number of years now, and he just, every time he gets overlooked. Like, as a college football fan, whenever I was starting to get into college football, it took me an absurd amount of time to know who Mike Gundy was because nobody talks about him. And quite frankly, it's ridiculous, especially when you look at the true core of how he puts together his teams. You look at the NFL, track record, if you will. Look at the guys who he's put into the league. It's not all that overwhelming. You've got guys like Mason Rudolph and Justin Blackmon before all his stuff happened. Like, most of the guys that jump from Oklahoma State to the NFL level aren't just superstars, but they play so incredibly well together because Mike Gundy knows how to make players fit into his system and knows how to make players learn their role and learn how to play as a team. So it gets him so far year after year after year, and he doesn't get enough respect for it just because he's not churning out these NFL caliber players or NFL highly drafted players. I shouldn't say NFL caliber because he has plenty of guys in the league. But yeah, there's not enough showing, or, there's not enough respect that's given to him. And even within this list, I feel like I put him too low. I feel like I'm disrespecting him by putting him at number 8 because there are a number of guys here that I think a lot of their stock is built a lot more on being flashy or, being hip and trendy or whatever. And Mike Gundy goes down to the root of football, puts together the best 22 to start the ball game, and they come out and they win a whole lot more often than they don't. So speaking of flashy and wow and pizzazz and all those buzzwords that represent the glitz and glamour, this next head coach went from the same state as Mike Gundy and is now in a very glitz and glamorous-y, you know what I'm saying. He went to California. If you can't figure it out, it's Lincoln Riley, the new USC head coach, and I would imagine this is going to be very low, a lot lower than some people are comfortable with. And there are two sides of the football. Lincoln Riley has shown the ability to recruit the lights out of the building. He's shown the ability to put very creative and very, very strong offensive units on the field, but it doesn't even look like he cares about the defensive side of the ball. And he is very much being carried by the fact that he can recruit so well and that he can put the offensive side of the ball in such a good position, because more often than not, it hurts him. The fact that, he can't really field a good defensive unit and hasn't really shown the ability to get great defensive coordinators, or at least, good enough to turn their defensive unit into one that is consistently formidable. And, it's kind of a weird thing that everybody thinks Lincoln Riley is such a great coach. He inherited a phenomenal program, phenomenal, capital P phenomenal, from Coach Stoops. And, he did well to hold on to it. And sure, he turned a couple Heismans with quarterbacks, but what would be a whole lot more impressive? Turning a couple national championships. And yeah, that's a big thing, but we talk like he is a national champion winner and somebody who goes out there and creates some of the best teams in the country. He doesn't. He creates some of the best offenses in the country that can often carry a defense through a game, but there's no proof for me with the fact that he is a world-beating head coach. I think you spent a whole lot of money on a very, very good head coach. I don't think you spent one on an elite one, if I'm USC at least. And another thing that kind of irks me with him, and I think I can call it irking because it's a lot of confusion around his stock and why everybody loves him so much, is that he's kind of shown that he doesn't have much of an interest in playing top competition. Whenever Oklahoma got announced to move to the SEC, he went to the Pac-12, and while yes, USC is going into the Big Ten in the next couple of years, it didn't ever really compute that he wanted to play the Alabamas and the Georgias, because it's hard to argue that the SEC isn't the best college football program or the best college football conference, because they are. They field the best teams, they put the most people in the college football playoffs. He ran away from that, and now he's going to the Big Ten, which has shown that Ohio State might be more vulnerable than we thought they were. Michigan got in there. Michigan State's, they were competitive last year. Wisconsin's always around. It's still a very good conference, but it's not as cut and dry. Alabama's going to be there. Georgia's going to be there. He kind of moved away from that, and I don't even know how much of a say he really had in the Big Ten move. So him running away from that is very unappealing to me. And so there are a number of things that I worry about him, but I obviously can't leave him off this list because of how good he is at the offensive side of the ball and as a recruiter. So yeah, he confuses me. One guy who I think it would be impossible to be confused with, because again, we've got another one that has just been so good year after year after year for most of the time that I've been alive. We're talking about Kyle Whittingham with Utah. If you don't know him, it's because he has gotten to the point where he is so consistently good that people don't even bother really bringing it up, because it's like, oh yeah, Kyle Whittingham's going to go out there and win 9 games each year. Like that's just the rule. Like that's what Kyle Whittingham does. And it's almost become to his detriment, because if he were to have like a 6-7 win season, I think he would get talked about a lot more. And whenever he comes back out and has a 10-win season, then it would almost go away, because people don't really talk about Utah football right now, especially because the Pac-12 is not what it used to be with USC, and now Oregon's probably on the decline, and the Pac-12 right now isn't really all that stable or solid or really high up in the rankings as far as Power 5 conferences go, and Kyle Whittingham has quietly been one of the best head coaches in college football for a very long time. The thing that most impresses me about Whittingham is the fact that, yeah, he's had plenty of times where he's come in there and, there's plenty of talented Utah Utes in the NFL, but it's the win-loss record, and more specifically, the lack of losses. So in 18 years of head coaching, which I think he's been there since 2004, so I would have been 3 years old whenever he got to Utah. He's only had 70 losses. Even if you want to take out the COVID year, make it 17 losses, or 17 years rather, he's on 68, which is, like if any other coach had that in at a Big Ten school or a ACC school, and you'll see the proof of that in a very short amount of time. If anybody else had records like that, you'd never stop talking about them. They would be the talk of every sports show and every outlet and every whatever for until they retired, because they are so good and they're doing it against this higher competition. Well, Utah goes out there, they win bowl games, they go out and they beat who they can beat, who is put in front of them, and Kyle Whittingham knows how to keep the guys coming in. Probably not the most talented recruiting classes in the world, and continues to turn them into very strong sides that can take a lot of very, very good teams to the brink or even beat them on their best day. We move from Kyle Whittingham into the top 5. We go with Luke Fickell from Cincinnati, and it's kind of been a back and forth with this list, going from Gundy to Riley to Whittingham to Fickell, because you see it's like older, more established guy, young guy who is kind of changing the game and building up his legacy still. Older, more established guy, younger guy who has just been phenomenal in his time at Cincinnati. So he's the only non-Power 5 coach you're going to see in this list for obvious reasons. And Luke Fickell if he was in any other conference, and this will remain true when Cincinnati moves to the Big 12, given that he remains with the team and doesn't take one of these giant jobs, he would be a top 3 coach in any football conference, and he is the top football coach in most conferences. So whenever he goes to the Big 12 right now, according to this list, he would be the best head coach in the Big 12, and that includes coaches like Gundy and Dave Aranda. That's how impressed I am with him, and just the fact that he's managed to do what he has done with Cincinnati is very, very just incredible, to say the least. So before Fickell got to Cincinnati, for a little bit of backstory, Tommy Tuberville, bottom out the Cincy football program. They won like 4 games. It wasn't very pretty. And then Fickell comes in. They have one bad year where he has to kind of establish his talent and his philosophies and things of that nature. They turn it around, and I don't think they've had anything less than an 8 or 9 win season since. And now the real feather in his cap is getting a group of 5 school into the college football playoffs, which doesn't happen. We've watched UCF go undefeated for an entire season, also out of the AAC, and not get that respect. Luke Fickell came into Cincinnati, and they beat Notre Dame, and they beat all these important schools, and they finally had to be like, look, this guy's doing such a good job with this program that we cannot feasibly keep him out of it, and they almost did. They were very, very close to keeping him out of the college football playoffs, but they let him in. And while, they lost, like everybody else does, to Alabama or Georgia or Clemson, whoever 1 and 2 are that year, more often than not, 3 and 4 are getting absolutely smoked by those 2 teams. So, it's the same as if you would have put in an Oklahoma, or the same as if you would have put in a Notre Dame. And Cincinnati being able to say that they're on equivalent levels to those schools proves exactly how good he has done with that program. Look at how many guys they just put in the National Football League. Their entire secondary just went, starting quarterback, best wide receiver. Just the list goes on and on and on. I think they've had 2 or 3 running backs in the past 4 years go to the NFL. So it speaks volumes to just how well he's crafted Cincinnati. And even if this year it doesn't look all that great, maybe they go with 9 wins, give or take, whatever it ends up being. He's still, to get that program to where when you lose all those people and still manage to recoup and end up being very good, says all you need to know. So we move into the top 4 now, and actually we go to Luke Fickell's alma mater. We talk about Ryan Day of The Ohio State University. So we're just about out of the Urban Meyer's team era, if you will, and Ryan Day is still doing very, very good for himself. I don't love and of course, with some of these monstrous programs, you're going to get what is basically the hand-me-downs and just being like, look, you got to figure it out. Good luck. And with something like Ohio State, he obviously had at least a year or 2 before he really had to be super hands-on and keep crafting what the conference was going to be in the future. But I think we're out of that window now, and Ohio State's still been really, really good. I don't think it's nearly as good as these top 3, but I think there's such a clear divide between the top 3 and the rest of the country that, you'll get to hear about it plenty. But Ryan Day, you could argue that the kids that Day has brought in and has started to put out and put into the National Football League are just as impressive as Urban Meyer's were, which is insane. Urban Meyer would have been probably a top 3 coach on this list if he was still around. Granted, he wouldn't be on the top 3 people on this list. That's for certain. But he knew how to coach football. That's just all it was. So Ryan Day, he's kept the ship straight. The coordinators have still been good. The only real worry I have right now is the defensive side of the ball. But if he can get, or rather with the talent that they have coming in, so long as they can get more comfortable and kind of work out some of those kinks, I don't think it's such a big worry like I have with Lincoln Riley, which you heard me go on a rant about with that. I think that his issues are significantly smaller than that, and as a whole, Ohio State has still been a very, very good program under his watch. So we move into the top 3 now, and they're all southern-located teams below the Mason-Dixon line. And we start with Georgia, and we talk about Kirby Smart. And, southern football, it's just better. And a lot of that is because they have the allure of the recruits that are down there and then the prestige of those programs. Georgia very much has that. They're in a powerhouse of a state to recruit in, and Kirby Smart has somehow or another managed to form or turn himself into a top 3 coach in college football with Nick Saban right next to him. And I'll never get over that. I didn't think that that was realistically possible while Alabama was, kind of on this tirade of just dominance. I didn't think that a Georgia could really be a top 3 program in the country, but Kirby Smart's put them there, and you can't fault him and you can't doubt him at this point anymore. The last real question I had about Kirby Smart was his ability to win when it mattered. He kept kind of coming up a little bit short, and they couldn't get over the hump. Well, he is now a national champion, so that means the last question is officially off the table. We know he can get it done. We know and with Stetson Bennett too, like not even his most talented quarterback that he's ever had in the building, it was Stetson Bennett, a 2 or 3 star quarterback that just managed to go in there and help drive the team. So Georgia finally getting that really, really helped out Kirby Smart because he could have been 4 or 5 if they would have lost in the national championship game. But now that we know he can win in the big lights, you can't leave him outside this top 3, and he is in that range of these top 2 guys. But I do give the edge to these top 2, especially number 1. I think number 1 is pretty far out and ahead. But before we get to number 1, we got to talk about number 2, who is Dabo Swinney for Clemson. If I mentioned that the southern states they have almost this monopoly on college football because all of the most prominent recruits, at least, and the legacy and the everything about it is really rooted in the South. College football is. Clemson is not among the list of prestigious programs over history, like not at all. Like Dabo Swinney came in and has now probably made something that whenever he leaves, the next guy who steps into that position will almost have a similar position to what the Georgias and the Alabamas and the guys who already have this lineage of phenomenal coaching and putting guys in the league and things of that nature. Clemson is turning into that on the back of Dabo Swinney. It takes a whole lot to take a program and a school that is not driven by football, they've never been great at football, and make them among the most passionate and dedicated in the country. And that's what Clemson is now, on the back of Dabo Swinney, who, to kind of put it in baseball terms, these top 3 coaches are like 5-tool prospects. The guys who can do literally everything and do it at a very high level. That's what these guys are. So Dabo Swinney, at this point, he's proven that he goes out there, he creates great teams, and he knows how to coach a good game of football. So it's he would easily be number 1 on this list, but again, number 1 is untouchable. I can't move number 1, and you know exactly who number 1 is. You cannot move that man until he retires, and even then, you might give him the honorary number 1 spot a couple years after, just because that's how good he's been. But Dabo's got the full package, and what's really interesting to me now is usually my sign for how elite a coach is by the coordinator clear out, we'll call it, whenever the offensive coordinator and the defensive coordinator are getting calls to go be the head coach for a new program. So where are the offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator for Clemson at now? Well, the offensive coordinator, Tony Elliott, he is the head coach of Virginia football, and this will be his first season. And Oklahoma will now have former DC Brent Venables as their head coach, a very prestigious program and now he's going over there. So they've completely cleared out the coordinators for not Lincoln Riley, but Dabo Swinney. And, that's usually a sign of how great you are and how great you've created your program to be. So Dabo Swinney will eventually be number 1. Like, I have zero doubt in my mind that he will eventually be the best coach in college football, but until Nick Saban retires, it is Nick Saban. There's no changing it. There's no arguing it. There's no debating it. Nick Saban is the best coach in college football history. He's the best coach now. He's been the best coach for like a decade. It's astounding because not only has he won just a truckload of national championships and put in hundreds at this point, I'd imagine, of college football players into the National Football League, but He's also won a national championship at LSU before he went to the NFL and then came back for the Alabama job. He's always been in for college football, and until he's done with the sport, he sits at the top. He came in, he put together almost a bulletproof program at this point. Like I said earlier, whoever takes over this job eventually, it's going to be almost impossible to mess it up, at least for like 3 or 4 years, unless you have some kind of ridiculous scandal or like some big blowout with the players, or you're just incompetent and have no clue what's going on. If you somehow mess the Alabama dynasty up whenever you come into the building, you shouldn't be there anymore. Like, as simple as that. There's no wait and see approach, because Nick Saban has built something that is going to outlive him, I would assume. And even whenever, all good things come to an end eventually, and whether or not you classify Alabama as a good thing, that's really up to you. But it looks like there's really not a clear cut into this, because all the guys on the current staff have been there and know how it operates and know how Nick Saban works. And even guys outside of it, like Lane Kiffin and some of these coordinators that have moved on to other places, they know exactly how it works. And somebody could step back in there and go to Alabama and just keep things running, because that's what Nick Saban has created. So if you have anybody you'd move around, which I would imagine you do, be sure to leave those in the comment section down below. That is my complete top 10 list as well. If you didn't hear your coach talked about today, I'm going to start doing ranking each head coach in a particular conference, and by 1 through however many people. So the next one will be the SEC. So 3 of them already, but the rest of the list is soon to come. But that's it for me, for now at least. Thank you for watching number 23, I believe. Yep, number 23. Good thing I write it down, right? Be sure to subscribe, and as always, I'll see you next time.